if I told you that a man with no known identity hijacked a commercial airliner, extorted a ransom equivalent to over $1.5 million today, and then jumped out of the plane into a raging thunderstorm, disappearing forever? This isn't a blockbuster movie script. This is the 100% true and still unsolved story of the man they call D.B. Cooper. He orchestrated one of the most audacious and baffling crimes in American history, leaving the FBI with a cold case that has frustrated them for over half a century. How did one man pull off the perfect crime and simply vanish into the night?
Hello and welcome to TSF History. We're your home for the most incredible, mysterious, and mind-bending stories from our past. If you love diving deep into historical enigmas and events that still have people talking, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button right now. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you become part of our history-loving community and never miss a single upload.
Our story begins on a day meant for homecomings and celebration. Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving. At Portland International Airport in Oregon, a man in his mid-40s, looking utterly unremarkable, walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He was dressed in a conservative dark business suit, a crisp white collared shirt, and a black necktie, carrying a simple black attaché case. He purchased a one-way ticket for the short 30-minute flight to Seattle, Washington. He gave his name as Dan Cooper. He boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727, and took his seat, 18C, in the rear of the aircraft. He lit a cigarette and calmly ordered a bourbon and soda. The flight took off on schedule at 2:50 p.m. The passengers were a mix of holiday travelers and business people, none of them paying any mind to the quiet man in the suit. To everyone on board, it was just another routine flight. But shortly after takeoff, as the plane climbed through the Oregon sky, Dan Cooper's plan began to unfold. He caught the attention of a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner and handed her a folded piece of paper. In the 1970s, it wasn't uncommon for businessmen to pass their numbers to flight attendants, so Florence, assuming it was a flirtatious gesture, simply slipped the note into her purse without looking at it. Cooper leaned closer to her and said quietly but firmly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Shaken, Florence opened the note. Written in neat, all-capital letters with a felt-tip pen, the message was clear and terrifying. Cooper then gestured to his briefcase, opening it just enough for her to see a mess of wires and 2 rows of 4 red sticks. There was no doubt in her mind. It looked exactly like a bomb. He dictated his demands. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency, which meant unmarked $20 bills. He also demanded 2 primary parachutes and 2 reserve parachutes. And finally, he instructed that a fuel truck must be standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane as soon as it landed. He was calm, articulate, and strangely polite throughout the entire exchange, never once raising his voice. Florence took the demands to the cockpit. The captain, William Scott, immediately contacted air traffic control, who in turn alerted the FBI and the president of Northwest Orient Airlines. The passengers were told that their landing in Seattle would be delayed due to a minor mechanical difficulty. For the next 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound, a ghost plane in the sky, while authorities on the ground scrambled to meet the skyjackers' demands. The FBI worked frantically, gathering the 10,000 $20 bills. They photographed every single bill to create a record of the serial numbers, hoping it would one day lead them to the culprit. Meanwhile, the parachutes were sourced from a local Seattle skydiving school. At 5:39 p.m., the plane finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper ordered the pilot to taxi the plane to an isolated, brightly lit section of the tarmac, away from the main terminal. He demanded that all the window shades in the passenger cabin be closed to prevent police snipers from getting a clear view. Once the money and parachutes were delivered to the plane by a single airline employee, Cooper kept his end of the bargain. He allowed all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants, including Florence Schaffner, to leave the aircraft unharmed. However, he insisted that the captain, first officer, flight engineer, and 1 senior flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, remain on board. While the plane was being refueled, Cooper outlined the next phase of his plan. They were to fly to Mexico City. He gave the flight crew a very specific and very strange set of flight parameters. They were to fly at the minimum possible airspeed without stalling the aircraft, approximately 115 miles an hour. They had to fly at a low altitude of 10,000 feet, which is barely above breathable air for a non-pressurized cabin. The landing gear had to remain down for the entire flight, and the wing flaps had to be lowered to 15 degrees. The pilots were stunned. Flying a Boeing 727 under these conditions was not only inefficient, it was dangerous. It put immense strain on the aircraft, but Cooper clearly knew what he was talking about. His instructions were not the ramblings of a madman. They were the precise requirements of someone who needed a slow, low-flying platform. At approximately 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 was back in the air, heading south. Cooper told the remaining flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, to go into the cockpit and stay there with the door closed. That was the last time anyone ever saw him. The flight path took them through a torrential storm over the rugged, densely forested terrain of southwestern Washington. Outside, the winds howled, and the rain fell in sheets. The temperature at 10,000 feet was well below freezing. Around 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the aft air stair, the retractable staircase at the rear of the Boeing 727, had been opened. The crew felt a sudden change in cabin pressure. They called out to Cooper over the intercom, but there was no response. The line was silent. The man known as Dan Cooper, with a 21-pound bag of cash strapped to his body and a parachute on his back, had stepped off that staircase into the heart of a freezing, violent storm and vanished into the vast, dark wilderness below. The plane, with its rear staircase still deployed, eventually landed safely in Reno, Nevada, around 10:15 p.m. Law enforcement, including FBI agents and local police, immediately swarmed the aircraft, ready for a confrontation. They found it empty. All that Cooper left behind were the 2 extra parachutes, his black clip-on tie, and a couple of cigarette butts. Thus began one of the most extensive and frustrating manhunts in American history, codenamed NORJAK by the FBI. An army of soldiers, FBI agents, and local volunteers scoured the projected drop zone, a massive, unforgiving landscape of mountains, canyons, and thick forests. They searched on foot, with helicopters, and even with submarines in Lake Merwin. They found nothing. No body, no parachute, no briefcase, not even one of the $10,020 bills. It was as if the man had literally evaporated into thin air. The FBI had a few clues. From the tie he left behind, they later managed to extract a partial DNA profile, but it has never matched anyone in any criminal database. The name Dan Cooper was quickly identified as a likely alias, possibly inspired by a Belgian comic book hero. A journalist's error in the early days of reporting led to him being called D.B. Cooper, and that's the name that stuck in the public imagination forever. For 9 years, the case grew colder and colder, becoming the stuff of legend. Then, in February 1980, an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the banks of the Columbia River at a spot called Tenna Bar. While digging a fire pit in the sand, his hands hit something strange. It was 3 decaying bundles of cash. When his family took the money to the authorities, the FBI confirmed the unbelievable. The serial numbers on the bills were a direct match to the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper. The discovery electrified the country, but instead of solving the mystery, it only made it deeper. First, the location. Tenna Bar was miles away from the FBI's original projected drop zone. How did the money get there? Did it float down the river? If so, why were the bundles still held together by rubber bands? And most puzzling of all, why was it only $5,800? Where were the other $194,200? The discovery of the money posed more questions than it answered, and ultimately led the investigators no closer to finding Cooper himself.
Over the decades, the list of potential suspects has become a who's who of enigmatic figures. There was Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran and expert skydiver who conducted a nearly identical copycat hijacking just 5 months after Cooper's, for which he was caught and convicted. But McCoy's physical description didn't quite match, and he was later killed in a shootout with the FBI. Another prominent suspect was Robert Rackstraw, a decorated Vietnam pilot with extensive parachute and survival training. He was investigated in the late 70s, but was cleared due to a lack of direct evidence. In his later years, he seemed to enjoy the notoriety, often giving cryptic answers to interviewers, but the FBI never formally named him as their man. Countless other men have been accused or have even falsely confessed over the years, but every lead has turned into a dead end. This brings us to the ultimate question. Did D.B. Cooper survive the jump? The arguments against his survival are compelling. He jumped into a -70-degree wind chill, wearing only a business suit, into a pitch-black, treacherous wilderness during a major storm. The chances of landing safely, avoiding fatal injury, and then navigating out of that dense forest were astronomically low. Most FBI agents involved in the case believe he almost certainly died upon impact or shortly thereafter from exposure. But the arguments for his survival are just as tantalizing. His calm demeanor, his knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities, and the meticulous planning suggest he was no amateur. He might have been an ex-military paratrooper with the skills to survive. If he died, why has his body, his parachute, or the rest of the money never been found, despite decades of logging, hiking, and development in the area? In July of 2016, after 45 years of active investigation, the FBI officially announced they were closing the D.B. Cooper case. They would no longer actively allocate resources to it, stating that it was time to focus on other priorities. But they still welcome any new physical evidence that might emerge. And so, the legend endures. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero to some, a symbol of rebellion against the system, a man who pulled off an impossible crime and got away clean. His story has inspired books, songs, and movies. He is the ghost in the machine of American aviation history, the man who stepped out of a plane and into immortality. Was he a brilliant criminal mastermind, or just a desperate man who got incredibly lucky, or perhaps incredibly unlucky? The truth remains lost to the winds, somewhere in the dark, rainy skies of the Pacific Northwest. So what do you think happened to D.B. Cooper? Do you believe he survived and lived out his days on a beach somewhere? Or did he meet his end in the unforgiving wilderness? Share your theories with us in the comments section below. We read every single one. And if you found this unsolved mystery as captivating as we do, please give this video a big thumbs up. It really helps our channel.